Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins in Hawaii, where scientist Kim Taft is sounding the alarm and ordering the evacuation of the Drake Industries headquarters immediately. Next, we see the reason for all the panic. A giant alligator has just escaped and is attacking the staff. While everyone runs for the exit, two scientists are left behind, hiding. One of them can't control his panic and tries to flee too, but the monster doesn't even need to move much to catch him and quickly devours him. Jason Drake is savoring his morning drink when Kim calls to inform him that the giant alligator has escaped and asks if she should notify the local authorities. He doesn't want anyone to find out about the confidential project and tells Kim to use the usual injection to calm the creature. Almost losing her patience, she explains that it doesn't work anymore. Furthermore, they need to do something before the creature reaches the inhabited areas on the other side of the island. Jason remains calm and asks how the other specimen is doing. She says the scientists are still trying to sedate it, but the growth hormone worked too well. Jason is still on the line when the wall of the containment area is demolished by the second creature, a hybrid species known as the dinocroc. Faced with this, the scientist simply screams and drops the phone, finally alarming her boss a little. Sometime later, young Katie and Bruce are relaxing on one of the island's beaches. Katie wants to go to a nearby waterfall, but Bruce is feeling lazy, so she says she will go alone. Quickly changing his mind, he starts following her through the dense forest until they reach the lake. Before diving in, Bruce asks his girlfriend to fetch a beer. While Katie goes to get the backpacks, Bruce enters the water and stands still in the middle of the lake for a few seconds. The giant alligator suddenly emerges, devouring the young man so quickly that Katie doesn't even notice what has happened. She gets upset when she sees he's disappeared, thinking it must be another one of his lame pranks. But the delay begins to disturb her, and she crouches by the edge of the lake, begging Bruce to stop joking and show up. With the sound of the waterfall nearby, Katie doesn't hear the heavy footsteps of the hybrid approaching from behind. The beast is less than a meter away when she finally turns around and screams in horror before being eaten as well. Meanwhile, Paul Beaumont is having difficulty convincing his superiors that Drake Industries is conducting dangerous experiments. His colleague, Mark, warns that Paul will soon be forced to abandon the investigation due to a lack of evidence. Today, a drone filmed the company building, and it appears to be abandoned. Paul finds it very strange that all the scientists left so quickly. In any case, he doesn't intend to go there now since it's his day off, and he says he's going fishing. Elsewhere on the island, Park Ranger Charlie Swanson is talking to his daughter Cassidy, who shares the same profession. He received concerning information from a photographer named Chris Hammond. Working in the mountainous part of the island, he reported seeing clothes and backpacks floating in the river, some with bloodstains. Since this is the least accessible area of the island, Charlie says he's booked a helicopter for the next day. Cassidy offers to leave before that, but he forbids her to venture there alone. As he tells his daughter to keep an eye out for anything unusual, two military helicopters fly in the direction of the mountains. They are bringing the team hired by Jason Drake to contain the two loose monsters. There are 6 paramilitaries, led by Captain Frank. As soon as they land on the island, they are approached by a scientist who seems terrified. He explains that he has been hiding for several hours and doesn't know where the creatures are. Hearing this, Frank simply pulls the trigger and reminds everyone that the order is to leave no witnesses to tell the story. He then divides the team into 3 pairs, and shortly afterward, one of them is crushed by the paw of the hybrid dinocroc. Startled by the screams and roars, Frank orders the other pair to return to the meeting point immediately. But before they get there, they encounter the hybrid and try to shoot it down, without success. The monster devours both of them in a single bite and shows up at the meeting point in their place. Faced with that creature, the captain and his last man try every kind of weapon and even explosives, but nothing works. Finally, the two decide to get out of there while they still can. Frank calls for the helicopter to rescue them and waits by the lake. There's no following scene, but the giant alligator suddenly appears and kills the 2 soldiers. At the Drake mansion, Jason is speaking with some investors when young Victoria arrives very angry. The security guard even tries to block her entry but ends up getting beaten. Victoria tells Jason that Frank's team hasn't returned from the mountains and asks how they will clean up this mess. Always very calm, Jason says it's time to call the specialist, a man known as the Cajun. His real name is Bob Logan, and by coincidence, he's hunting alligators in Louisiana when Victoria contacts him. Upon hearing Jason Drake's name, he immediately asks what he'll have to kill this time. Paul is fishing peacefully when he receives a call from Mark, preparing himself for more problems. However, this time his colleague has good news regarding the investigation. Calling in a favor from a friend in the FBI, he managed to get a second aerial survey of the Drake laboratory. The images that Mark has just received show destroyed buildings and debris everywhere. This supports Paul's theory about the large animals being used in the company's experiments. Nearby, Cassidy is conducting the afternoon patrol, and the engine of her boat starts to fail. She reaches the bank at the same point where Paul is fishing, and he offers to help her. While he fiddles with the engine, she spies on his work with curiosity, but without him noticing. It seems that the boat collided with something, damaging some parts. Paul says there's no way to fix it right away and offers her a ride in his Jeep. On the way, he is forced to brake hard, and they are both surprised to see large rocks blocking the path since they both know it wasn't there a few hours ago. Then, a chilling sound comes from the forest, and Paul asks if that was thunder, already knowing it wasn't. He and Cassidy rush to get into the Jeep and turn around. At one of the island's resorts, friends Haley and Janet are complaining about their boyfriends. The boys' hangover is so bad that they've given up the helicopter trip to the waterfall, but the two decide to go without them. When Haley goes to check the details with reception, one of the guests starts bothering Janet with inappropriate comments, even attempting to touch her. Bob arrives just then and gets rid of him with a simple shove. After leaving Janet impressed with his manners, he goes to a staff member named Jerry, who passes on Drake's messages to him. Then, Jerry answers a call from a famous actor named Chaz Kingsley. He says he's arriving at the resort in 4 hours and needs someone to make the rooms ready for 3 people. Paul and Cassidy decide to take shelter at the nearest property, which technically would be an invasion. She only agrees to this due to the special circumstances but is increasingly suspicious that he is not just an engineer as he claims. Haley and Janet are already at the waterfall and are startled to realize they are not alone. Chris Hammond is there too and seizes the chance to introduce himself as a photographer for a famous magazine. The girls ask for a photo in front of the waterfall, and he says his boss might complain, but gives in upon seeing their lovely bikinis. In the midst of the photo session, Chris is attacked by the giant alligator and quickly devoured in front of his models, who start screaming in fear. The two girls run until they are exhausted and then decide to find their way back to the hotel since the helicopter will take a long time to return. Following a dirt road, Haley screams upon seeing a sinister eye staring at her from the foliage. Then the super alligator emerges from hiding and bites her legs. Janet tries to pull her friend out of the monster's mouth, but soon loses the struggle and is also eaten. Meanwhile, Charlie is called to a local farm to investigate a strange attack on the cows. Farmer Roy says the animals started running in panic a few hours before, apparently for no reason. His guess is that this is the work of aliens, but Charlie shows that it was some kind of animal, as there are huge bite marks. Worried about the wave of strange incidents, Charlie tries to call his daughter on the boat's radio and becomes even more nervous when she doesn't respond. Cassidy is still with Paul, and things aren't going very well between them. Tired of trying to get information from him, she steps out of the car and says she prefers to be alone. Paul finally admits that he works for the federal government and is in Hawaii to investigate a secret complex in the jungle. Drake's company claims to be developing agricultural technology, but he suspects they are manufacturing something for military purposes. Cassidy still doesn't know what to believe, so he takes her to a field full of gigantic mushrooms and says that this is part of Drake's research. Speaking on the phone with Victoria, Jason emphasizes the importance of covering up the experiment so that it can never be traced back to the company. She is already waiting for Bob at the designated location and guarantees that she won't mess it up. The boat is already ready and with the requested modifications. When Bob arrives, he tells Victoria that she can't go with him at all, but she doesn't want to hear it and hops onto the boat. Always very direct, she spends the trip calling Bob a hick and complaining about nature. Moreover, she doesn't believe him when he says he took the task more for the challenge than for the money. Paul and Cassidy are still in the mushroom field when Kim Taft arrives asking for help. They ask what she is fleeing from, and the Dinocroc himself answers, with a terrifying roar. The three run to the jeep, and Paul hits the gas with the creature right behind them. Cassidy pulls out her gun and starts shooting, but she can't even scare the beast. Luckily for them, the boat passes by just then, and Bob has more powerful weapons than the park ranger. He launches an explosive projectile that hits the creature squarely. The trio manages to escape in the jeep, but Bob warns that this only temporarily stopped the monster. Kim wakes up in the hospital with everyone gathered in the room, waiting to hear what she has to say. The scientist explains that she and her brother Stuart spent the last few months developing a catalyst to speed up crop growth. As soon as they had some success, Jason Drake altered the project's direction and ordered them to inject the catalyst into crocodiles and alligators. She didn't want to take part in this madness, but Stuart was afraid of losing his job and ended up convincing her sister. Kim explains that Jason chose these specific animals because they are amphibious and very resistant to diseases. The goal was to create a vaccine that would not only protect people but also make them stronger and more agile. Thus, what started as a quest to end world hunger ended up becoming a project to create super soldiers. However, the catalyst had no apparent effect for several weeks even when the doses increased. That changed 2 days ago when the animals suddenly turned into monsters. Stuart was next to the Dinocroc's cage when it escaped, and Kim had to watch her brother being crushed by the wall. Everyone leaves the room shocked by the tragic account, except Victoria. She lingers a moment longer, looking at Kim with an irritated expression. Elsewhere on the island, Chaz is relaxing with his companions, Vicky and Darla. He starts bragging about the success of his films, and Darla asks if there are any roles left for her two friends. Chaz reminds them that to be a horror star, one must know how to scream very well. Excited, the two begin to demonstrate their vocal power, but Chaz is not impressed. He advises them to think of their worst nightmare before letting loose because the director will ask them to scream as if their lives are in danger. Very helpfully, the hybrid Dinocroc appears in front of the pool just then, causing much more realistic shrieks. He devours all three in less than a minute and continues on his way to the next victim. The next morning, Victoria sneaks into the hospital and distracts the nurse with a fake call. Armed with a syringe, she goes to Kim's room and injects a lethal substance into her arm, covering her mouth so she can't call for help. However, Paul arrives at the room before she can leave the crime scene and immediately realizes what she has done. She attempts to stab him too, and the two begin to fight. Paul squeezes her neck until she drops the syringe, but then she knocks him down with a shock and escapes. When Bob and Cassidy arrive, Paul tells them what happened, and Bob goes after Victoria. As soon as he recovers, Paul calls Mark and tells him he recorded Kim's entire story on video. In addition, he warns that Victoria is a dangerous ally of Jason who has likely fled the island. Mark says he will personally intercept the meeting between the two criminals. Bob returns to the hospital and says the focus now should be to exterminate the two beasts as quickly as possible. Paul says that only the military would be capable of such a feat, but Bob disagrees and states that the military will only get in the way since they don't know these animals. Crocodiles are the worst enemies of alligators, and this can be used as an advantage. Bob's plan is to provoke a fight between the monsters and then take down the winner when it gets tired. Charlie and Cassidy agree with the strategy, and Paul also agrees to cooperate. Bob has access to military-grade equipment and suggests flying over the island in a helicopter, using infrared to locate the creatures even if they are hidden. Since both are very sensitive to sound, it will be easy to lure them with explosives until they reach the battlefield. Bob boards one of the helicopters, and before getting on the other, Paul reaches out to Cassidy. To his surprise, she opts for a warmer goodbye, even under her father's disapproving gaze. While Bob and Paul scour the entire island, a tourist bus is passing by an abandoned hotel, which was once the Cocoa Palms. The tour guide explains to the visitors that the place was devastated by a hurricane in the 90s, but before that, many Hollywood stars stayed there. No one seems very excited about the crumbling building, and the group continues on their journey, unaware of what lies hidden beneath the old resort. Paul finally detects something near a decommissioned factory and asks the pilot to descend a bit more. The hybrid soon appears behind the building, and the pilot warns that he won't land near that thing. Talking to Bob on the radio, Paul says he has an idea, and the two agree to meet. Showing a map of the island, he states that the factory is in a hard-to-reach valley. Instead of trying to get the Dinocroc out of there, it would be better to use the valley itself as the combat arena, exploding the side tunnels to close off the exits. Now they just need to find the giant alligator and lead it there, but Bob says they need to hurry. It's already past noon, and alligators typically come out in the hottest times to hunt their prey. At the cocoa palms, the group of tourists is losing patience with the guide, who promised to show them the room where Elvis Presley stayed. The group continues on foot while the driver takes the opportunity to take a nap. The roar of the giant alligator wakes him up, and for a moment, he thinks it must have just been a dream. But when the noise continues, he looks in the rearview mirror and can't believe what he sees. There's no time to even turn the key in the ignition, and the monster jumps onto the bus, crushing the vehicle with its colossal body. While they plan how to blow up the tunnels, Bob comments to Paul that Jason needs to pay for everything he has done. Paul assures him that he won't get away this time and says he sent Kim Taft's statement to a colleague. In front of Jason's mansion, Mark is lying in wait with a female FBI agent. Victoria arrives, cursing Jason and complaining about the forced partnership with Bob. The agents storm the house shortly thereafter, accusing Jason of conducting illegal genetic experiments. When they identify Victoria as the prime suspect in the murder of Kim Taft, she decides to resist arrest and begins shooting. The agents return fire, and she is hit, while Jason starts to have a heart attack. His nurse appears and tries to help him, but he doesn't survive. While Charlie and Cassidy search for the giant alligator, a couple of tourists lose their patience and interrupt the tour. Yielding to the pressure, the guide points to Elvis's cabin and says they can head there first if they want. However, all this discussion is happening very close to the central lake, and before the couple can respond, the giant alligator swallows them. The rest of the group disperses with screams, running in all directions. Seeing that crowd of frantic tourists, Charlie quickly grabs the radio and reports that he has found the creature. Not wanting to wait for backup, he tries to confront the monster alone and tells Cassidy to run. Crying, she pleads with her father to come with her, but he prefers to help her buy time. The giant alligator devours Charlie shortly thereafter, to the despair of his daughter. Moreover, his sacrifice doesn't help much, as the monster is already right behind the car as soon as she starts the engine. Paul is horrified when she calls him on the radio and says she's leading the giant alligator to the valley. He warns her that it's too risky and asks her not to do it, but she tells him that the beast took her father, and now it's personal. Paul and Bob then make some adjustments to the plan to help Cassidy escape once the giant alligator arrives. Minutes later, the car goes through the tunnel with the monster following closely behind. Bob detonates the bombs, and the hybrid begins to take notice of the trap. Cassidy gets out of the car right in the middle of the valley, and the giant alligator is ready to attack her when it comes face to face with an equal foe. Paul and Bob join Cassidy behind a tractor to watch the duel. The creatures clash, spreading destruction throughout the valley and breaking a tank full of sawdust. Paul decides to move closer to act at the right moment and asks Bob to give him the leftover explosives. The Dinocroc comes out on top in the fight, flipping the giant alligator onto its back before the final attack. Paul throws the dynamite and jumps into a watering trough before the explosion. Cassidy becomes anxious as smoke covers everything, but soon she sees that he managed to escape unscathed. The other good news is that the two monsters have finally been defeated. The survivors celebrate with relief and leave, not hearing the quiet whimpers of the hatchlings among the rubble.